Good afternoon, welcome along to Racing TV. The continued absence of live racing from both Ireland and of course Great Britain. We are bringing you a brand new series starting off right here and right now. It's the racing years and we go back to the year 2011, Frankel's classic year. Of course, the first year of Kipco British Champion Series, and some brilliant memories to have along the way. We want your interaction, studio@racingtv.com or at Racing TV on Twitter. And I can say that there have been plenty of good selections in so far. We'll endeavour to play out as many of them as we can later on, but loads to fit in. We've got some great contributors live on video and indeed on the phone to come up. But just a reminder to begin with, these are the best sights and sounds that we've found from 2011, just to refresh the memory before we begin.
Heading down towards the second last, Porto Star from Denver, and here comes Long Run on the outside, three in the air together, what a finish, Porto Star, Long Run out wide, then Denver in between the pair, here comes the final fence, Long Run takes over, Long Run's younger legs are taking in clear of Denver in second, Porto Star can't go on, and racing up the hill, it's Long Run, and the amateurs there, Wayne Cohen, Long Run, long on talent, the younger legs are going to prevail, and Long Run lifts the Gold Cup. Denman another mighty run in second, tight for third between Porto Star and the running on Pandorama. Frankel continues to be in a massive lead to Casamento in second place, and then rerouted behind that is Passport, Dubarby Gold coming from the back of the field, but at the bushes Frankel is 15 lengths clear. Frankel is heading down towards the last quarter mile. He's making every yard of the running here. Dubarby Gold and Native Khan have moved into second and third places. Passport is behind in third place, into the dip. Frankel continues to be in front. He's 6 or 7 lengths clear. Dubarby Gold is coming to second. Native Khan in third position, inside the last furlong. A horse who is pure class. Frankel has destroyed them from halfway. An amazing performance as Frankel heads towards the line to make every single yard in the Guineas and win it well. Dubarby Gold in second, Native Khan in third.
And Memphis, Tennessee leads still by 4 lengths. Treasure Beach is in second, Native Khan into third. Carlton House down the outside. Then the pink colours towards the inner of Recital. Plenty with a lot to do at this stage as they make their way now with a furlong and a half to challenge the race. Memphis, Tennessee from Treasure Beach. Carlton House towards the outside. Then in fourth, Native Khan. Recital comes next, Paul Mark for a long way back. Treasure Beach got to the front in the derby. Memphis, Tennessee and Carlton House in hot pursuit. Out in front, Treasure Beach from in second, Carlton House. Paul Mark coming strongly down the outside. Treasure Beach just in front. Paul Mark coming on the outside. And celebrates as if he's won the derby. Mikel Barcelona. The judge may be needed. Paul Mark and Treasure Beach.
But they're into the home straight now. 3 to jump. Porto Start, the third last. Over it safely. He's 3 or 4 lengths cleared. A long run, Captain Chris and Summersby. Heading with 2 fences to jump then. And Porto Star still has this about 3 or 4 length advantage at the second last. He's at it now. He's jumped it perfectly. Long run in second position. Captain Chris in third. Summersby behind this in fourth place. It's a 5 or 6 length lead. He's rewritten the record book so many times. Porto Star. Long run is still trying to close on him. The last. Porto Star. 2 lengths ahead. The long run in second position. They're heading towards the line. The steeplechaser of a lifetime. Porto Star is in front. Long run's closing, but Porto Star has done it. He's won 5 King Georges. Long run was second. Captain Chris was just third, and Summersby fourth.
Some quite wonderful memories from Porto Star to Mikel Barcelona celebrating the derby with that extreme confidence on Paul Moir having just snatched it in the dying strides. It's time to introduce our first guest here on 2011 The Racing Years, and it's a very good afternoon to Dave Yates. Dave, I hope this finds you well.
Frustrated a bit, I suppose, the same as everyone else, Nick, really. I had coronavirus, or what I believe to be coronavirus, after on the Sunday at Cheltenham, and I've been stuck in this flat now for 2 weeks. So, you know, interesting times, aren't they?
Just a bit, Dave, just a bit indeed. We'll reflect on the year of 2011, and we've just seen some of those highlights. Obviously, Frankel's front and centre, his classic year, that blitzing performance in the 2000 Guineas, but then, as I mentioned, the likes of Long Run winning the Gold Cup from Courtaulds coming back at the very end of the year and winning the Betfair Chase, and then winning his 5th King George. We'll be talking about that a little bit longer or more in depth a bit later. But just in terms of your overview of the year, it was the first year of Kipco British Champions Series and British Champions Day at Ascot late in October. So we're now into the 10th year of that, would you believe? I know it doesn't seem that long ago, but when you actually look at what's been and gone since, it's worth reflecting on, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, particularly with Kipco British Champions Day, it was a obviously new a project that had its opponents. I think a lot of people felt that it was that whilst most of the racing programme was an organic thing, this was really something that was a product of British racing marketing. In that sense, I think that it wasn't universally popular. However, it moved the Champion Stakes and the real finale to the flat racing season from Newmarket to Ascot. The thinking behind that is pretty self-evident, that that you didn't get a big crowd at Newmarket on Champions Day, which I think had started or had become Champions Day in about 1997, I think, so you got bigger crowds at Ascot, and obviously the whole venture was blessed to have Frankel in its first couple of years. You're right that that it was. I suppose we would say every racing year is an extraordinary one, but there were so many interesting aspects to this one. As you say, Courtaulds Star certainly won. Dramatic runnings of both the Grand National and the Derby. In the Gold Cup, I felt that it was the end of an era with regards to Long Run, this 6-year-old beating the likes of Courtaulds Star and Denman, but undoubtedly 2011 would be remembered, I think, to most racing fans as the year that this 3-year-old Frankel appeared and was, well, not only every bit as good as the horse that we hoped he would be for Sir Henry Cecil, but indeed he was much better than that.
Dave, really interesting to get your thoughts. We're going to tee up our next guest. You'll be staying with us for the duration of the show, which I'm delighted to say. But in terms of teeing the next guest up, we're going to do a bit of trivia, and it pertains to the Cheltenham Festival. I'm going to fire a question at you, and that was, how many Irish-trained winners were there at the Cheltenham Festival of 2011? Was it A, 9, B, 13, or C, 18? Which do you think?
2011. I will go for 13. I haven't got a clue.
Well, you've had a good old guess at it, because it was exactly that. There we are, number 13. It was B13, and that tees up a man who fired in a few of those winners, and it's a very good afternoon to Ruby Walsh. Ruby, first and foremost, before we start going through your memories of 2011, I think you're coming to us live via video call. I hope you and the family are all well at what is a very challenging time, of course, internationally as well as closer to home.
Yeah, of course it is, Nick. Well, I mean, it's a pandemic, so I mean, it is global. It's going to touch most of the world, or pretty much all the world. But we're all good, thank God. Haven't had much reason to go anywhere other than be at home for the last couple of weeks, so that's the way it'll stay.
When it comes to 2011, Ruby, we were just reminiscing. It's a good festival for you. We're going to look at the Cheltenham Festival of 2011, of course. Just before we begin, I'm right in saying that you were only just back from injury. Was it Newbury Sandown, one of those Saturday fixtures just before the Cheltenham Festival of 2011? So a bit of a race against time, but it was worth it when you actually got there.
Yeah, it was. Courtaulds Star had come to Downroyal the previous November to run in the JN Mine Chase it was then, and I broke my leg in the following race off a horse called Corrick Bridge, so I was only just back in time for Cheltenham, and it was a rush, and I guess going there, I hadn't ridden any of the novices through the winter. I didn't even know if I was going to ride Hurricane Fly in the Champion Hurdle, so I don't have great memories at the beginning of 2011, Nick, to tell you the truth. I think January and February of 2011 were a couple of months I'd rather forget.
But in terms of the way the festival began, there was no better way than to get the ball rolling than to win the opening race of the whole thing, which was the Supreme Novices Hurdle. We'll look back at it now. You were on the grey in the colours of John Hales. That was Alpha off. Plenty to do at this stage, but just look at the horses in front of you at this stage. Spirit Sun, who we probably didn't see the best of. A certain Sprinter Sacra. Q Card as well. and your horse was never stronger than at the finish, was he?
No, he wasn't. Obviously, Q Card and Sprinter Sacra travelled extremely well through the race. I think Barry Garrity probably thought going to the last he was going to win on Spirit Sun, but in fairness to Alfroth, he was nothing but tough and game, and he really stuck his head down when I needed him and rallied from the last. He'd been off the bridle pretty much most of the race, Nick. Didn't miss a hurdle, in fairness to him. He jumped absolutely brilliantly, and when I wanted him kind of 3 out, 2 out and again at the last, he was spectacular. And it was a big relief, I remember at the time. I remember Paul had put me back on him, and to go and win the first and having to, I suppose, have ridden him from so far out, it was a good test for me as well, and it was a big relief to win on him.
He was a super horse. We'll get to the Champion Hurdle, because I suppose for British racing fans, he hadn't got to the Supreme a couple of years ago. Go Native had won that. We knew where the class was as regards Hurricane Fly standing over Go Native in Ireland. But this was the first real opportunity the British racing fans and Cheltenham had to see Hurricane Fly back in 2011, and he certainly showed everyone what he could do.
He did, and I mean, look, he'd had a super record in Ireland. Obviously, he'd been to France and won as well, but he hadn't been sound enough to bring him to Cheltenham up until this year. And you know, it was a very good Champion Hurdle. It was Pedlar's Cross was coming there, having won the Ballymore the year before, and he was unbeaten, so it was a big clash. He travelled. He was actually very keen on the day, but in typical Hurricane Fly fashion, he jumped every hurdle with the accuracy that's required, and pulled out plenty from the back of the last. But it was a cracking race, and he pulled really hard, was my memory of it, how hard he had pulled throughout the race. And when Jason Maguire set sail and Pedlar's Cross off the home turn, I got a lovely run through. He jumped the last well, and he battled really well from the last home, and it was, I suppose for Willie and for the connections of Hurricane Fly, it was important that he got to go to Cheltenham and show the British racing fans how good he was. And I suppose for Irish racing fans, it was great that the horse they thought was the best had come to Cheltenham and won.
He didn't miss a beat afterwards, did he? He came back and became the first horse since Comedy of Errors to go and reclaim the Champion Hurdle, having been beaten in 2012. But thereafter, the fact that he'd never got to Cheltenham beforehand, he went to any number of the Cheltenham Festival renewals thereafter, didn't he?
He did, but I think that's a trait of Willie Mullins' training, really. If you see how long he can make horses last and how many times he can bring them back from little niggly setbacks, and he gave our Hurricane Fly all the time he needed as a younger horse to get over whatever issues he had, and by the time he did get to run at a couple of Cheltenham festivals, he was a really sound, healthy horse. And look, I didn't shine on him in 2012, and then he was very good again in 2013.
Also on that day, in terms of what you said, it obviously was a season of disappointment given the fact that you had injury problems beforehand, but to come back on that Tuesday I should say, have Alpha off, have Hurricane Fly, and then that clockwork winning machine Quevega. This was leg 3 of the 6. I just had to do the maths again to work out 2011. She'd won it in 2009, and she was still winning the David Nicholson in 2014. I suppose when you analysed your squad each year, there was always one that you could rely on, wasn't there?
I was lucky in those years. This was the first year. Quevega and Big Bucks. I mean, she had a grab at the last here, a little bit lucky, but she won really, really comfortably. I mean, that was her best performance, and it was the easiest that she had. I think it was the easiest she won any of them. Obviously, as she got a little older, she had to battle a bit harder in 2013 and in 14. But I think she was at her prime then, Nick, and she was a steering job that year. Anybody could have ridden her, but anyone could ride most of them. It was only a matter of getting on them, but she literally was a steering job.
What really characterised her? What was it that set her apart, Ruby?
I don't know. I think when you go back through her form, Nick, you'll see as a juvenile, a 4-year-old, she was third in the pre-Alan Debris in Auteuil in June. David Casey rode a Hurricane Fly, finished second in that race. Davy Condon rode him. She was always a high class mare, and after she won her first in 2009, she went back to Punchestown and ran in the Champion Hurdle when she was third behind Punjabi and Solwyd, I think. And then she went back in 2010 and won the 3 mile hurdle again. In 2011 she went up to 3 miles. She was a very good mare. She had definitely had issues before she won it the first year, and Willie minded her really well, and she was she was her own character. She was quite moody, and Willie would spend 6 months getting her ready. She'd come back into training the same time as all the other horses, but she would take so much longer to get her ready and get her fit, because that's just the character she was. And I think that to get any horse to anywhere 6 times is amazing, but to get a horse to go to a Cheltenham Festival and win 6 years on the trot, and especially one that wasn't maybe as straightforward as people thought, like Huiviga, I think that was some training myself.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about it. We'll move on to the Wednesday, and obviously there were the ups and the downs, and I suppose Masterminded, a horse who'd given you those amazing days in 2008 and 2009, particularly 2008. Who could forget that performance when a 5-year-old? He didn't win the champion chase. There was a late enough mistake. It was an Irish domination with Sizing Europe beating Big Zeb, Captain CB, Gold and Silver. But it was, only a month or so later that he made amends and you went and bolted up in the Melling Chase at Aintree.
He did. I don't know, for whatever reason, he was probably never as good again as he was in 28. He won it in 2008. He won it in 2009. I can't even remember what happened in 2010. This was 11. But, obviously, as you said, Sizing Europe beat Big Zeb. Gold and Silver was 4th. Captain
CB.
Eddie Harty's horse was 3rd, wasn't he? Captain CB, yeah, he was 3rd. But look, Masterminded, what he did as a 5-year-old was incredible, and he won it again as a 6-year-old. But I suppose, as you said, Nick, he went from there and went to Aintree. He was a bit of a long shot in the Melling Chase, over 2.5 miles. He'd failed to get 2.5 as a younger horse, but he got it really well in Aintree that year. We dropped him out and he arrived on going to the last and absolutely bolted in. Maybe as he got a bit older, he got a little slower, I don't know, but I don't think he was ever quite the horse he was as a 5-year-old, again, throughout his career. He was a brilliant horse, but he just didn't have the longevity maybe that a Cauto or a Big Bucks or a Denman had.
You've teed it up beautifully. We're moving on to the World Hurdle of 2011, and it was leg 3 of the 4-timer for Big Bucks in the World Hurdle, who was just a superstar of a racehorse. And that winning run that he went on that stretched so many years. You had Grand Cru as the big rival on the day. He's just loomed up the grey as we pick it up here in 2011. As the years go by, how sort of sweetly do you reflect on a horse like this? I've seen you just drop the whip as well, so it was hands and heels at that point, Ruby.
I was just going to say that. It was just the year I dropped my whip, it was. Yeah, look, and I suppose as he got a bit older, people got more aware of what kind of horse he was. Different guys tried different tactics. It has to try and beat him. And Tom Screw tried to deliver Grand Cru as late as he could, but Big Bucks had an incredible engine, and he was only ever doing enough. He was never going to go and win 8 or 10 lengths. He only ever won by as little as he had to, but he was a prolific stayer, and he had a pretty straightforward pattern. He'd start in Newbury, he'd go to the long walk, Cheltenham, Aintree. Paul had a plan with him every year and always seemed to have him spot on. But I think I got lucky that year dropping my whip, and I think Big Bucks and his ability got me out of jail. But he was an amazing racehorse. It was a pity that he did get injured later in his career, because I think he definitely could have won a 5th World Hurdle. But look, that was number 3, and it was sweet at the time, and it's still sweet. And he was an incredible racehorse, and I often thought that if he could jump better, he could have been a champion hurdle horse. He wasn't as slow as people thought he was. He was lazy, but jumping slowed him down a bit, and if he jumped better, he could have been anything.
There really were some vintage horses at this time. We're going to come to the Gold Cup, but I just want to throw in a brilliant finish. It really was an incredible finish involving you and Sir Anthony McCoy, 2 of the finest riders the festival's ever known, and that was the County Hurdle, obviously in 2011, and it was the finish between Final Approach and Get Me Out of Here. There were just those incredible shots afterwards, Ruby, where I think you covered your face because you didn't know whether you'd won. I don't know whether AP knew whether he'd won or not. I don't think we'd be showing it if you hadn't won on the day, Ruby, because I wouldn't want to force the issue at all, but you did get the verdict, didn't you?
I did, but look, people say, oh, what a great ride or whatever else. You can't even see him in the shot here now. I got lucky here. I mean, if you're talking about rides and how you should deliver one or whatever, the AP has timed it perfectly and get me out of here. I just got lucky on Final Approach. I mean, to come from where I came from, he'd missed the first hurdle. They were going too fast for him, and I'd ridden 4 winners at that stage, Nick. So I just sat up, let him find his feet, and rode him to come home. And he came home incredibly well. Like, he jumped the last when I needed him, and he rallied every step of the way to the line. But this wasn't brilliant timing, or I knew where the winning post was or anything. This was just the way things panned out, and I got lucky. And even when I got to Get Me Out of Here, he rallied again, and I got him on the line on the nod, and no, neither of us knew. And I think at the time it was one of the first years they had updated the photo finish equipment, and I would have imagined in years gone by that would have been a dead heat, but thankfully for me on that occasion the new equipment was in play and they were able to split the two of them.
We've got to get to that Gold Cup later that afternoon. Beautiful sunny day, and it was the passing over of the baton to a degree. You were on Kauto Star, the 11-year-old, the 11-year-old Denman, obviously. The two of you would pick it up here, fighting around the home bend. I think Kauto Star had actually touched odds on in the run as well before you both had to give best to the 6-year-old, the first 6-year-old since Millhouse, long run, and the amateur Sam Whaley-Cohen aboard. Just sensationalise this for us, if you will, because it was an awesome race to watch, and it's a privilege to watch it back and hear your thoughts as well.
It was, and look, to be honest, I could see how Kauto went as short as he went in running, because away from 3 out, I thought I was going to win another Gold Cup on him, but when we rounded off the bend and Denman got to me, there wasn't anything left in Kauto Star. And then, Denman looked to have the better of Kauto, but, long run came swooping by us, and he'd been, I think, a little disappointing in the previous year's RSA. He'd obviously won a Feltham as a novice, as a 4-year-old. He'd been beaten in the RSA as a 5-year-old, but he came back. He'd won the King George that was run in January that year, and he went to the Gold Cup a big player. And I think a little bit like Mastermind, though, Nick, he was definitely a better 5 and 6-year-old than he was 7 and 8-year-old. And he was just an incredible horse that day. And I did think, like Dave said a while ago, that the future looked to be long runs for any number of years, a 6-year-old doing what he did in the Gold Cup. But it was the only Gold Cup he won, and he just was definitely an incredible 6-year-old that maybe just wasn't as good as a 7-year-old, but he was very good that day. Sam Whaley-Cohen gave him a great ride, and yeah, I don't have the fondest memories looking back at it when he finished third, but it was a hell of a performance from long run.
Just with that horse, with Kauto Star, who is many people's favourite horse of all time, myself included, after that day, he was 11, and of course he went to Punchestown and was pulled up thereafter. Could you have possibly imagined that winter later on, of course winning the Betfair Chase and that 5th King George, could you have possibly imagined he still had it in him at that stage, Ruby?
I didn't, but I was always a believer in trusting the trainers and what they thought. So when he pulled up in Punchestown, Paul just said, we'll bring him home, give him the summer off and see what he's like in the autumn. So I didn't speak to Paul all summer about him. I didn't want to know. It was always going to be up to him what he wanted to do with him. But I know from early in the autumn Paul was talking him up, and he was quite confident. And I know when we went to Haydock for the Betfair Chase, he was very bullish. We were there on the Friday as well, and we stayed in the hotel beside the racecourse, and Paul was on about Cato all night, and again at breakfast the following morning, and how fit he had him, how ready he was, how right he thought he had him. And we discussed what way he'd like him ridden and what I'd do. And I think Paul Nicholls got a huge amount of satisfaction out of that Betfair Chase win. There'd been a lot of people that wanted Kauto to be retired. Paul had kind of stuck his neck out and said, I'll make that decision, and he put his own neck on the line, and it paid out, and I think in spades. I mean, the crowd that day in Haydock, the atmosphere, and it was a brave call, and I was certainly glad Paul Nicholls made it, and I think he got huge personal satisfaction out of it. I think he got a great kick out of it, and I was delighted for him and the horse.
Delighted for you as well, no doubt. I think he broke the track record that day. But just to talk about horses and soundness, and we talked about the fact that Hurricane Fly had missed a couple of years before going to the festival for the first time. Big Bucks didn't perhaps get a chance to win a 5th when he was in his prime. Kauto Star, I mean, that was 6 years after he'd won his first Grade 1, the Tingle Creek. I mean, just to have the brilliance but also the soundness to match was an incredible tribute to the horse himself, wasn't it?
Oh, incredible. I mean, to think he got injured as a novice after he fell in Exeter. He then got a terrible fall in the Champion Chase the following year and got a woeful kick in that day as well. And he came back that year in 2007. He came back and had the incredible year he had, and then to last the length of time he did. But I think, Nick, that's probably the difference between a good horse and a great horse. Great horses have to have soundness and longevity, and here he was back winning a 5th King George as a, after all he had done, and to jump out, go to gallop, he went that day in Kempton, and to keep stretching horses of the ability of Long Run and Captain Chris, and he was just He was incredible this day. Even at the second last, he flew it. Again at the last, he flew it. And I don't think I ever heard a horse get a reception like he got that day in Kempton. It was incredible, and that was definitely one Christmas present that I really enjoyed.
Just a bit. With Christmas that day, obviously Boxing Day 2011, you weren't on him when he was beaten in the January the year before, of course. Did you feel there would have been a suspicion that Long Run would have stepped forward for Haydock? But did you feel we're going to confirm form here? Because the betting obviously once again had Long Run as favourite. But did you see it that way? Did you think Kauto Star will once again confirm form with Long Run?
Well, Paul was fairly happy that he had improved a little bit, and he was only going to need to improve a little bit to hold Long Run. But of course, as a jockey, you play it down. You kept talking up Long Run and put the pressure on them, pass the baton, I suppose. But Paul was quite confident about him, and Kempton is that kind of track that if you have a horse very fit and definitely going to stay, that you can ride aggressively like that, they can often be hard horses to peg back. And Long Run, whilst he was a good jumper, he could miss the odd one, and Kauto was able to put him under pressure from flag fall. And Kauto Star was just an incredible racehorse. He was the horse of a lifetime, and I mean, 5 King Georges, 2 Gold Cups, Tingle Creeks. I mean, it's something you dream of, and there he was as a 12-year-old winning his 5th King George on 11. Was he 11 or 12?
11 rising 12.
I can't remember. 11 rising 12, almost 12. I think it was incredible.
Was just a bit. I'm just going to get the thoughts of Dave Yates very quickly. I think, Dave, just hearing what we heard from Ruby Walsh there, principally about Kauto Star, the very fact that we're looking back at the last decade, 2011 onwards, for a horse who was winning Tingle Creeks in 05, 06, Gold Cups, 07, 09, the longevity, just to be able to be talking about those achievements in the last decade as recently as 2011 is a true testament to the horse, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's how we judge great jumpers, isn't it? It's something that Desert Orchid did in a generation before Kauto Star. He was able to dominate from 2 miles to 3 miles, 5 and a bit furlongs in an Irish National. He hardly took a lame step. As Ruby says, the longevity, the quality, but also that ability to do it from 2 miles to beyond 3 is another mark of a very special horse. I mean, it seems a weird thing to say, but when you think of his record as a steeplechaser, the only horse in history to regain the Cheltenham Gold Cup, the 5 King Georges eclipsing Desert Orchid's record, all the races that he won, including the Tingle Creeks, I think that Betfair Chase victory at Haydock in November 2011 was one of the races that I remember more fondly than any other, because if you like your redemption in sport, you like your heroes coming back when they've been written off, then to see Kauto Star come back at Haydock that year, I feel I've got goosebumps thinking about it now. We thought we'd crowned a new king at Cheltenham the previous March, the 6-year-old Long Run. We thought that those of us, in the press, and I'm sure lots of jumps fans as well, thought that we'd seen the best of Kauto Star and that quality would not return. And then to see that at Haydock in November is one of the most abiding memories, as far as I'm concerned, of any jumps race.
Mm. Here, Dave, completely agree. We'd like to thank Ruby Walsh as well for that really extensive and good look back at the Cheltenham Festival of 2011, and of course the exploits of the magnificent Kauto Star later on in the year. But we're going to be switching codes via a question, and no clue as to which champion we're talking about now. Frankel's total winning distance in lengths for his 5 2011 wins was either A, 25.5, B, 12.25, or C, 19.75 lengths. What do you reckon, Dave?
Well, it was 6 lengths in the Guineas, wasn't it? I think it was about 3/4 in the... it was definitely 3/4 over Zoffany in the St James's Palace Stakes. I think that the Greenham was probably about 4.5, so that's what, 10 and a bit, and we've still got the Duel on the Downs, haven't we? Which was about 5 maybe. I'm going to go for 19. Was it 19.5?
It was 19 3/4 lengths, but you got it bang on.
One anyway.
Got it bang on. There we are. See, 19 3/4 lengths, Frankel's accumulative winning distance in 2011. And to talk a bit more about Frankel, someone that knew him very, very well indeed, someone that knows him, but in particular knew him as a racehorse as well, Lord Grimthorpe of Juddmonte Farms. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you? How are things at the moment? It's an extremely difficult time, Lord Grimthorpe, but thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Nick. Obviously, everyone's sort of hunkered down. We're all working from home. And trying to make things of what we can. Really, it's bizarre times.
It is indeed. Just before we move on to Frankel, it's bizarre times for the racing world, but also the bloodstock industry. Everything has been hit by this as well, hasn't it, Lord Grimthorpe?
It has. Every single asset and every single facet of the whole business has taken a blow to the solar plexus, no question about that. And it's a question of we're really sort of hoping and waiting to see how this whole thing develops. But certainly we're going to need to be able to pick up the pieces eventually.
Yeah, well, news will develop each and every day, but a nice way of just blossing that out ever so slightly would be to look back at the year that was 2011 for Frankel, because he was that outstanding juvenile, and we'll go back and take a look at his first performance of the year. It was, of course, the Greenham run in mid-April at Newbury. I know you will have talked about Frankel, of course, for endless amount of hours to various different news outlets around the world, but to just to go back and give us your senses of what it felt like bringing this outstanding 2-year-old and the winter that was going into his first race as a 3-year-old. What was the feeling around?
I think the feeling, almost not quite from the day he was born, but fairly soon after, was the sort of huge weight of expectation he carried throughout his career, really. And each day, each race, he went on to prove that expectation and beyond. So coming into his 3-year-old career, I don't think we could have been more excited. Henry was incredibly positive about the horse. Prince Khalid was unbelievably excited, I think. And so the Greenham was his first real test. Again, we weren't quite sure exactly what to expect, but he'd been in great shape going into the race, so we were pretty confident all round, really. And I think that obviously showed up in the Greenham. And really, of course, he beat Celebration, who was pretty unknown there, and everyone said, oh, well, that probably wasn't much. He only beat him by 4 lengths. But actually, he went on to win the German Guineas, and of course was right in with Frankel for almost all his career. So I think that set the scene anyway.
The signature performance of his 3-year-old career was, of course, at Newmarket on the 30th of April. It was a beautiful, sunny, warm day as well, and we're just watching back the head-on performance because the rest of them are strung out so much. It was not only was it a performance of destruction, power, brilliance, but when you watch some of the angles, it was almost like he was floating. He was so graceful on the turf as well. It was one of those I was there moments for anyone that was there, but for you to be so closely associated with him in that performance, how do you reflect on it now?
Well, we certainly ran the sort of gamut of emotions, I think, there, because we got rerouted from Barry Hills's as a pacemaker, something for Frankel to sit in behind, hopefully rerouted in the first part of the race, and then kick on. That was the general idea until the draw came out, and they were drawn 1 and 13. It's hard to believe, and of course, short of concertinaing the whole field at the start, which probably would have been disastrous, Henry very much said to Tom beforehand, just let him do his own thing, and it'll be what it'll be. And Tom carried out that absolutely perfectly. There was no point. Frankel had a very high cruising speed, which sort of a lot of people thought he was doing far too much, but it was really something that he just had in him, really, and to see that, it was a surreal performance, and the horse 13 lengths clear at halfway in the Guineas was I mean, I don't think anyone in living memory. I mean, I think you have to go back to Tudor Minstrel to see a performance like that, and that was 1947.
Just sensational shots, and the packed enclosure there, everyone wanting to get the greatest vantage point of Frankel, which you were obviously in the midst of, and it was just the building of something extremely special. He went by the St James's Palace, and we'll move on into the summer of that 3-year-old campaign, and it was his first go against older horses, and we were building it up. The popular thing was to say that it was the duel on the Downs against Camford Cliffs. Obviously, Camford Cliffs was retired shortly after owing to injury, but I suppose by this point there was this huge expectation on Frankel's shoulders and everyone associated with him, but also an excitement each and every time we were going to see him.
Yeah, I think he'd really got into the public and the wider public's consciousness by this stage, and so therefore, I mean, the horse didn't know he'd got pressure on him. I mean, he wanted to race, meeting Camford Cliffs, who'd had a stellar career, no question. Richard Hannon had done brilliantly with him, and also was an absolute sensational miler in his own right. Certainly added some frisson to the whole day, and the build-up was pretty extraordinary. It was in terms of press attention, and the way the horse had been going again gave us good confidence. And I think beforehand, Henry said to Tom, you know, don't be afraid to let him make all. If you want to, and of course it was a pretty slow beginning for everybody, but I think then Tom took the strong point of view and let him bowl along, and then sort of gradually increased and sort of kicked on from about 2 out.
It wasn't his last performance of the season. The QE2, which of course was one of the headline races on the first ever Kipco British Champions Day, which was all concentrated at Ascot, obviously in mid-October. And it was just another exhibition of what this horse could do. And by this point, I think nobody was in any doubt whatsoever. What was the Henry Cecil like coming to the end of this season in particular? We did have obviously the question: would he go forward as a 4-year-old to sign off as he did like this as a miler? We knew what would happen obviously when he stepped up in Trip later the next season. But what do you remember at the end of the 2011 campaign?
I think it was. I mean, really, if you'd sort of written it out at the beginning of the year of what he would do, I don't think you would have got anything wrong, really. Henry himself was always absolutely adamant of what he should do and where he should go. Prince Khalid had great faith in Henry, so was certainly keen not to interfere, as it were. I think he wanted. His main idea was to let Frankel and let Henry show himself how good he could possibly be, and I think that's really what happened, which is why the Derby was a consideration, I think, before the 2,000 guineas, but I think after the 2,000 guineas, I think everyone was pretty much agreed that the mile route would be the best. I always said that Frankel would be effective between 5 furlongs and 1.5 miles, given the right circumstances. But no doubt, at a mile, he would have been incredibly hard to beat by anything.
Perfect career, 14 out of 14 in all, and the legacy continues, of course, at stud as well. It would be remiss of us not to go back to 2011 and talk about, obviously, a very significant race for Juddmonte, and that is the Juddmonte International, and to a degree it was the perfect result. The stablemates, the older stablemates of Frankel, midday over on the far side, that wonderful mare who also won a Nassau that year. She won any number of Group 1s, and twice over, and I think Sir Henry Cecil described this performance of the two of them, twice over beating midday in the International. He said they were both champions this day, and it's hard to argue, really.
It is. It ended up being a sort of Juddmonte bred 1, 2, 3, actually, because Await the Dawn in the table colours was third. And Tom went on midday, and then Ian Mongan rallied twice over, as you can see, and he just got up in the closing stages, really. I mean, twice. He was the most lovely, charming individual. He was if he'd been a human, he'd have been a gent. You know, the sort of person who stood up and opened the door, and he was just genuine, honest, straightforward. I think everyone at Warren Place absolutely loved him, and he's of course gone on to be a very decent sire in South Africa, which is fantastic for Bernard Cantor. Just watching that back, I mean, could you allow yourself to be cheering for one or the other, or was it just didn't matter either way? Believe me, I didn't. The build-up was such that Await the Dawn actually started favourite, I think, and of course Prince Khalid had sponsored the race for 20-odd years at that stage and had not won it. So, it was his flagship race. And with the previous year, I think we'd had both Byword and Twice Over get run down by Rip Van Winkle. So when I saw our two horses, Prince Khalid's two horses, coming through, I thought, oh God, don't let this happen again. But as it turned out, they both ran brilliantly to the last. It was a very, very memorable day. Wasn't it just? Lord Grimthorpe, thank you very much indeed for your time and sharing your thoughts on 2011, principally Frankel, but also that wonderful result with Twice Over beating Midday in the Jobmont International. Take good care and we'll speak soon. Great, Nick. Thank you. Lord Grimthorpe there talking about Frankel and that stellar 3-year-old year that he had, and of course it went on at 4. And Dave Yates, just watching those bits of footage back again, races like the Greenham I wouldn't have seen for a few years. It's quite a privilege, really.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, the Guineas, you know, we talk about I was there moments. I mean, it was the most astonishing race. So I remember watching it in the press enclosure of the Rowley Mile. And, of course, as has been mentioned, you had Frankel in stall 1, rerouted in stall 13. And, of course, rerouted never got to the front. Ian Bartlett in the commentary says, I think that Frankel is a dozen or 15 lengths clear at the halfway point. I watched it next to Eddie Fremantle, and I think as they ran from I think up to the furlong pole with Frankel in this wide margin lead, we just looked at each other and burst out laughing. Such was the ridiculousness almost of this performance. You know, you're not supposed to see classics win by those sort of margins and in that sort of style. It was amazing. It was absolutely brutal. It reminded me of like the Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, where, you know, he basically this was a club job rather than a rapier. He was just the most incredibly brutal horse that day, and nothing could live with him. That was the one, you know, like most people, I think, from 2011 that I will just never forget.
Here, 9 years ago, Frankel's brilliant performance in the 2000 Guineas. We'll be talking about that later, because we're talking about the first ever Kipco British Champion Series. But we're going to swap codes, swap back to the National Hunt Sphere of 2011, and go back as we do with Dave Yates and a question for him. And the question is as followed: which Donald McCain horse finished second behind Hurricane Fly and Sprinter Sacra, obviously in different races, but across the year 2011? Which horse was it, Dave?
Oh no. Oh, we had this. We were talking about this the other day.
I think Ruby mentioned it today as well.
My mind's gone a blank. I can't remember. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
It was Pedlar's Cross, of course it was. It was a fine second in the Champion Hurdle. And Pedlar's Cross was trained with distinction by Donald McCain, who I think joins us now. Very good afternoon, Donald. How do we find things? Obviously, extremely difficult time, but hopefully you and yours are okay.
Yeah, we're okay, Nick. Thanks very much. Yes.
Great stuff. We've talked about Pedlar's Cross and his fine second to Hurricane Fly, but we want to concentrate on a race that the McCain family is so associated with, and that is, of course, the Grand National. But before we look at Ballard-Briggs, 2011, of course, winning the Grand National, I suppose for you, growing up, the name McCain, the Grand National, everything Red Rum, and of course later with Amberley House, it just meant that so much to you, I suppose, as a family, and you couldn't have got away from it as a child, even if you tried, I suppose.
No, every I mean, it was like not a bank holiday, but the biggest day of our year as a family growing up was Grand National Day. Dad used to throw a pretty well-known party on the Friday night before Aintree, and a lot of the jockeys and trainers and owners, etc., used to turn up. It was sort of standard practice, and we were watching on as it all happened, and then they all sailed off to Aintree, you know. So it was the biggest day of the McCain year for sure.
2006, I think you took over the licence, and within 5 years, you'd put your name as the trainer next to a Grand National winner. Could you summarise just what that meant to you?
Well, I was very lucky, truthfully, Nick, to be involved. We were very involved with Amberley House before that. I used to ride him every day, and my wife looked after him, and so on. And he was the one good horse in the yard. So I felt very lucky to have been. When that happened, I thought, well, I might not have trained one, but I've been very involved in one, you know. But obviously, to win it in our own right was a massive thing, and with hindsight, to do it the same year as my father died and stuff was even more special, you know. The
last Grand National he saw, he passed away, of course, in September. He was there that day, was he not? Yeah,
he was. Yeah, he was there that day. I remember him coming in the press room afterwards with us, and obviously the memories you cherish. And the morning afterward, and everyone turned up, and we're out in the garden with the horse and him, and that sort of thing. You know, it was a special day.
It was. Red Rum 3 times, Amberley House, and then of course Ballabrig. So 5 for the McCain family. He was a terrific horse anyway. Wasn't he already a festival winner by that point? He'd won a Kinmure the year before.
Yeah, he'd won the Kinmure, and it doesn't work out this job as well as that very often. But from the day he won his first handicap chase, I think he'd missed the season before with a back injury, and he came back and was placed, and then won at Catterick. And literally from winning that handicap chase at Catterick, myself and Mick Meager, Trevor Hemmings' racing manager, the plan was geared around trying to turn him into a Grand National horse, genuinely, and it just doesn't work out that way that often. But then he went and won at Cheltenham, and it was all systems go to Aintree then, and to actually get there was one thing, but in the manner we did was magic.
When you look back at the achievements, we obviously that was an era, we talked about Pedlar's Cross, but you also had Overturn, who was the most high-class, versatile horse. Is it a particularly sort of golden era you look back on at the moment, Donald?
I wouldn't mind another go at it, that's for sure. I mean, I was very fortunate that fortunate, unfortunately, they all came along at the same time. I mean, truthfully, people have asked me before about Overturn, but in the yard, he never quite got the credit he deserved, because he couldn't lace the boots of Pedlar's Cross at home and on a racecourse. But I wouldn't mind any one of them now.
Just in terms of winning you obviously were very heavily involved with Amberley House, who won the race back in 2004 under the name of your father, Ginger McCain. But to win it in your own right, was it a different sensation at all? Were you able to drink in the experience? I think there was those tremendous shots of you running under the rails to go and greet the horse. It was an incredibly warm day, of course. We know the significance of that on the day. But did you manage to take it all in, or did it all sort of go by as a bit of a blur?
No, we took it in. There was a huge amount of satisfaction, because it had been a plan for so long, and these things you don't do on your own. Like I say, Mick was very involved and stuff, and to do it for Mr. Hemmings, who didn't need to support me from day one as a trainer, but did, obviously, you know, and Aintree meant as much to him as to us and everything, you know. So no, it was a very, very special day, and we enjoyed the whole thing.
And just while we've got you on, obviously success this season in the North, the first northern-based rider to win the Jockeys Championship since John Joe Neal 40 years ago. That, of course, was Brian Hughes, and I know he won't obviously get to have the celebration at the end of the season with it being cut short and being cut short prematurely, but a tremendous achievement for him in his own right.
Very much so, and to have a stable jockey that's champion jockey, I don't know if we quite thought would happen, you know. So it's magic, and more than for us. I mean, Brian's work ethic is second to none, but for the north of England, it's brilliant. We do feel somewhat overlooked on occasions, you know, and even when this was going on, there was an awful lot of talk about how Dickie was going to get past him and so on, but I think it's finished with them ending up the same distance apart as when Dickie came back, you know, so he's a worthy champion.
Hear, hear. Donald McCain, thank you very much indeed for taking the time out. Hope things stay safe up there and that we get racing back on again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. All the best.
Donald McCain reflecting on Ballard Briggs, and also words on the likes of Pedlar's Cross and Overturn, some of his stars back in 2011, and more recently, of course, Brian Hughes, the champion jockey of 2019-2020. Back to Dave. Just interesting to hear Donald's thoughts there, and it obviously does resonate even more so given the fact that when he won the Grand National in his own right, it was the last Grand National that his father Ginger would see, who sadly passed away in the September, but it makes it even more significant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for people of, well, my age, obviously Ginger McCain was the single person most synonymous with the Grand National, largely thanks to the exploits of Red Rum, but of course Amberley House as well. It was a special day. As you say, we lost Ginger in the September of 2011, and that must have been an incredible day for the whole family. It was also, I think, from a news perspective, Nick, it was the beginning of the end of the national, the old national. There were two fatalities in 2011, Ornay and Dooney's Gate, and that was the day, really, I think, that racing, I suppose, woke up to the fact that in terms of safety, equine safety, something needed to be done about the race. There were further fatalities the following year. The changes came in bit by bit in terms of the cause to the fences and, of course, the distance of the race. We have a different national these days, but I think we certainly have a safer one.
Dave's thoughts there on the chat we just had with Donald McCain, and of course the Grand National winner back in 2011 with Ballard Briggs. We've got another piece of trivia for you next, or another question, and that is, which jockey famously asked to borrow 20 quid from Nick Luck for a taxi after being hit with a fine under the new whip rules, which you'll mention, of course, that came in 2011 with Dave Yates. Dave, do you know the answer?
Yes, I do. It was Christophe Soumillon. I'm certain of that.
Here we go. It was Christophe Soumillon, and I think we can actually have that very clip from back in October 2011.
Well, I must congratulate you on what we believe to have been a fine ride on Cirrus des Aigles, and thank you very much for talking us through your experience in the stewards room.
Thank you. And do you have £20 for me, because I have to pay my taxi and I have no money anymore?
GC, James, a score for Christophe. Christophe hasn't lost his sense of humour. Thank you very much indeed.
I think he said after that, Christophe Soumillon, he needed to find a good lawyer for the hefty fine after Cirrus des Aigles won the first Champion Stakes when staged at Ascot on the inaugural Kipcote British Champions Day, which kicked off in 2011. But the series itself, the Champion Series, began with Frankel's brilliant victory in the 2000 Guineas. And to talk about it a bit more, it will be, hopefully once racing resumes, the 10th renewal of the Champion Series. And to talk a bit more and go back to the first year is Rod Street, the Chief Executive of Great British Racing. Rod, how do we find you?
You find me in good form, thank you very much. We're all adjusting, aren't we, Nick? But we're proving to be very adaptable, as humans are, and in good form. But what about you?
Not too bad at all. Really enjoying this nostalgic look back through 2011. It was a significant thing on the flat, the landscape changing with of course, the Champion Series coming in. And we were just talking, in terms of writing a script and having the Champion Series coming in and writing the script for the way that we want to announce it, you couldn't have had it better than Frankel's Guineas win that day back in April 2011.
No, it was remarkable, wasn't it? Because you'll recall that when we launched the series and the new day, because it was new and it was changed, that not all of racing was entirely behind it. And so it came in, not, I think, in the popular way it's seen now. So we needed a really bright start, and of course we had that amazing horse. And yes, that was the very, very first race of the series. 10 years ago. That's flown by, and it really got us off to a flying start. And I think Frankel, for the first 2 years of the series, provided us with a storyline and a level of publicity which really, really helped us get off the ground. And all of his victories were special, but his two appearances on Champions Day were obviously incredibly important.
What do you remember the first Champions Day back in 2011, of course, obviously of this programme, mid-October, and we did have some superstars. We saw Christophe Soumillon, who won the Champions Stakes on Cirrus des Aigles. I think the first race was the Long Distance Cup, which was formerly the Jockey Club Cup at Newmarket, won by the Gold Cup winner at Royal Ascot. That was Fame and Glory. What do you remember of the very first day?
I remember being very relieved that the sky was blue, being that we were in October. And I walked into the venue very early that morning with the late, great journalist Alan Lee, who said to me in his typically understated style, "Somebody likes you, Rod." It was, there was great trepidation. It hadn't been held before. It was a new event for Ascot as it was for the Champion Series company, and so we all wanted it to go well and for the racing to do the talking, and of course it did, and we had a little bit of everything that day. Obviously, Frankel was a big draw in the QE2 and beating Celebration. I think though the biggie that day was the Champion Stakes, won by a fantastic horse in Cirrus des Aigles, and that controversy that went with it, because in that build-up to that Saturday, we'd wanted to be on the front pages all week, as we often are now with talk about the day and the excitement, but the new whip rules were really the lead story then, and of course we had that controversy in the big race itself, but I mean it created more storyline, but it couldn't have started more brightly, and we've, I hope we've gone from strength to strength, and we look forward to celebrating our 10th anniversary at Ascot this year. We know there is tremendous uncertainty at the moment about when we next race, but we hope that, if we're looking at October, it's far enough away to believe that it might yet happen.
But if I'd have asked you at the beginning, before Frankel won the Guineas that day, before the series had begun, and said you will be approaching your 10th Kipco British Champions Day in 2020, if I'd have asked you to sort of imagine how it's been cemented in the calendar, would you be absolutely delighted with what's transpired over the last decade or so?
Yeah, we are. We talked to the sponsor Kipco a lot about this, who've been fantastic, long-term and very committed sponsors. And the vision was to make it a world-class race day, and we do that consistently, and it's often on ratings one of the best, if not the best, single days racing in the world. And that was always the aspiration, to make it a really important end-of-season event, and use the series to shine a light on the best quality flat racing during the year. And so we are pleased. Our following over social media on Champion Series is one of the biggest social media followings in the world, which is brilliant, and I think it shows that people are interested in the best of sport, and now I think people look forward to Champions Day as one of those really important calendar events. So yes, and the challenge is to keep that investment and to keep that focus on quality, and to have 10 more after this October. It's gone very quick though, Nick, I have to say. It doesn't feel like 10 years.
I don't think this show feels like it's gone on for 1 hour, but we're nearly at it. Rod, thank you very much. It's flown by. Keep safe and well, and we'll speak soon.
All the best to you. Thank you.
Chief Executive of Great British Racing, Rod Street, talking about the first ever Kipco British Champions. And he teed me up, Dave Yates, to what also captured the imagination and certainly made the news, and that was the change of the whip law that happened around that sort of time. Richard Hughes relinquished his licence. He didn't ride on the day. It was very significant.
Yes, indeed. This, of course, triggered by that massive number of 8 out of 8 million people who watched Bala Briggs win the Grand National, who complained about Jason Maguire's use of the Procush. We've only got a couple of minutes, Nick, so I'm afraid it's best not to get me started on that. I'd just like to mention one thing from the rest of the year, and that was Paul Moir's win in the Derby, of course. The commentary of Richard Hoyles that Mikel Barcelona celebrates as if he's won the Derby was one that I can only marvel at, that a commentator can come with something like that off the cuff. And of course, a first victory in the race for Andre Fabre as well. So that was a true milestone year, 2011, in terms of Epsom. We had a favourite in Carlton House for the Queen, who I'm afraid, unlike Frankel, didn't really turn out to be the horse that we hoped he would be.
Dave, thank you very much indeed. Keep safe and well, and hopefully we'll have seen the back of this pandemic sooner rather than later. We'd like to thank Ruby Walsh, Rod Street, and also Donald McCain. And also thank you to you at home for watching as well. This was the review of the year 2011. Keep safe and well, and we'll see you again very soon.